Hey, welcome back everybody. This is Stephan from a channel called The Great World History Book, named after my book about the greatest time periods and characters from all of world history. And I've got something very special planned for you today, for we're going to look at the life of the Buddha. Let's dig right in. So let's start with some background information. The Buddha lived about the 5th century BC. Some sources say the 6th, some the 4th, so there's much uncertainty about this date. Yet we'll stick with the 5th century. The earliest full biography of the life of the Buddha is called the Buddha Karita, was written centuries later, centuries after that, somewhere in the 1st century AD, so 600 years later. By that time, his life story had turned into legend, filled with magical, supernatural events. Yet, despite the fantastical nature of this story, it still has some powerful lessons, and that's why I really want to share this story with you. On another occasion, I will look at a much older text about the teachings of the Buddha, his own sermons, and you will see in that other lecture that his sermons are way more down to earth, less magical, fantastical, and so on. But this time we'll look at the life of the Buddha. So let's start. The story starts with a boy named Gautama, who grew up as a prince in his father's palace. Shortly after his birth, a seer named Asita came to the palace, and he predicted that the boy would become a great spiritual leader. Gautama's father, King Suddhodana, realized this meant that his son would become a hermit who would live alone in the forest, and this would end his royal line, for he would not have a legitimate heir anymore if his son would leave the palace. And this made his father very, very anxious. Here we have a relief, by the way, of Asita making his prophecy holding the young Buddha in his hand. In an attempt to avoid the prophecy from coming true, the father, Suddhodana, set out to shield his son from all the suffering in the world, so that he would see no need to turn to a religious life. He gave him all the delights the world had to offer to ensure he would never ever think of leaving the palace. Once older, somewhere in his teenage years, his father also made sure to surround him with beautiful women of pleasure who sang and danced and played music. And he also arranged for him a beautiful bride with whom he had a son. And here we see a 19th century painting from Burma, where in the middle we see the Buddha, to his left we see his wife, and in front of him we see the dancers and people playing musical instruments in his palace. Yet Gauta's curiosity could not be contained. For after he heard about the beauty of nearby groves, he desperately wanted to see them, and he tried to convince his father. His father finally granted his wish, but staged the trip so thoroughly to prevent him from seeing any suffering. He was moved around in a golden chariot on a road covered with flowers. However, the gods had other plans. They intervened with the 4 sights of suffering, famous symbols in Buddhism. The first sight was the appearance of an old man along the road. This was Gautama's first encounter with old age. Gautama responded as follows. "Who is that man there with the white hair, feeble hand gripping a staff, eyes lost beneath his brows, limbs bent and hanging loose? Has something happened to alter him? Or is that his natural state?" The charioteer responded, "That is old age, the ravisher of beauty, the ruin of vigor, the cause of sorrow, the destroyer of delights, the bane of memories, and the enemy of the senses." In his childhood, the charioteer continued, that man too drank milk, and he learned to creep along the floor. Then he came step by step to vigorous youth, and he is now step by step in the same way gone to old age. Gautama responded, "What? And will this evil come to me too?" The charioteer was very honest. He said, "Without doubt, by the force of time." Now think a moment about the beauty of this quote, especially the way the story has been brilliantly set up. By shielding the Buddha in the first 15 or so years of his life from all the suffering, he can now see old age as it truly is. By encountering it for the first time, you see a true response from Gautama of what it truly means to become old. In our own life, we've grown up seeing suffering, old age, disease, and so on. So we've become habituated to it. We've become used to it. But that's why we cannot see old age for what it truly is. And this story brilliantly allows us to get into the mind of someone seeing that for the first time and realizing what a shock that must be to discover. But that is the truth that we all have to deal with. And Buddhism, to a great extent, is about realizing this truth that we will all become old. We have to deal with that and come to terms with that. Gautama was in shock and he asked to be driven home. But not long after, he was ready for another trip. Curiosity took over again. And this time the god sent a man afflicted by a disease. The prince, Gautama, said, "Yonder man, that man over there, pale and thin, with swollen belly, heavily breathing, arms and shoulders hanging loose, and his whole frame shaking, uttering plaintively the words 'mother.' When he embraced, there a stranger. Who is that?" The suffering is so beautifully depicted. When we are healthy, we feel like we'll live forever. But to truly understand the meaning of sickness and that it could come to all of us is a very important lesson in life. The charioteer responded, "My gentle lord, that is disease." And Gautama asked, "And is this evil peculiar to that man? Or are all beings alike threatened by disease?" The charioteer said, "It is an evil common to all." And then for a second time, the prince Gautama, trembling, desired to be driven home. A third time, the gods made a corpse appear. We read, "But what is that? Borne along there by 4 men, so lifted by 4 people, adorned but no longer breathing, and with a following of mourners." The charioteer, having his pure mind overpowered by the gods, told the truth. "This, my gentle lord, is the final end of all living beings." Gautama responded, "How can a rational being, knowing these things to be true, old age, disease, and death, remain heedless here in the hour of calamity? Why does nobody panic?" He then asked, "Turn back our chariot, charioteer. This is no time or place for pleasure." And here we see the Buddha in his golden chariot, and in the top right we see old age, disease, and a corpse. The fourth sight of suffering occurred when Gautama was riding his horse across a field that had just been plowed. In the grass, he saw insects that had been killed in the process. Filled with a deep sorrow, Gautama got off his horse and sat down at the foot of a rose apple tree. And here we see a beautiful sculpture of the Buddha under his rose apple tree. Once sitting there, a feeling of selfless empathy overtook Gautama. Instinctively, he positioned himself into the yoga posture and he entered into a meditative trance. He went calm and he felt momentarily released from any attachment in the world. He felt free. Then a monk appeared before him. The monk is the fourth sight. Gautama asked who he was, and the man answered, "Terrified by birth and death, desiring liberation, I became an ascetic. As a beggar, wandering without family and without hope, accepting any fare. I live now for nothing but the highest good. Of course, this inspired Gautama. This monk seemed to present an answer to his problems. After these words, the man rose up in the sky and disappeared, revealing himself to be a god. After the encounter, Gautama went to his father to tell him he wanted to become a monk as well. His father tried to persuade him one last time not to go, but Gautama responded, "Father, it is not right to lay hold of a person about to escape from a house that is on fire." This serious did he take the problem of old age, disease, and death. He needed to find an answer to all this suffering. In the night, Gautama secretly escaped from his palace. The gods magically opened the door of the palace, which was locked, and Gautama rode out with the help of his charioteer. When outside the city, Gautama looked back and he roared like a lion. The lion's roar of the Buddha is one of the famous symbols of Buddhism, suggesting the power, the liberating power of truth that the Buddha had found. When saying goodbye to his charioteer, he spoke, "I shall either return having slain old age and death, or else myself perish having failed. I am not to be mourned, nor have I departed at a wrong time for the forest. There is, in fact, no wrong time for religion." And then he left. In the story we read that he cut off his hair and threw it up, and he stated that the hair would not fall down if he would become the Buddha. And indeed, the hair stayed up, his knot of hair stayed lifted up in the air, and then it was picked up by the king of the gods who put it into a jewel case. And here we see a sculpture of that famous moment, the cutting off of the hair, a very powerful symbol in Buddhism as well. Once in the forest, Gautama went in search of various monks who tried to teach him the path of salvation. With each teacher he found, however, he listened to their teachings, but eventually he rejected them all. They didn't have the true final answer. Among these various monks, Gautama eventually joined a group of monks who were practicing severe fasting, until the Buddha only had skin and bone remaining on his body. At one point he was so weak that he was left for dead on the side of the road. Yet despite all his effort and all his suffering, it did not help. Here we see one of the most famous statues of the Buddha in this state of severe fasting. Although he had been so disciplined with his fasting, his body kept asking him for attention, and he still experienced lust and craving. He then began to question the approach. He thought, how was one to attain liberation without any strength left in your body? No willpower left at all. There was no need for extreme fasting, he concluded. Instead, the mind should be put at rest by having just the right amount of food in the body to satisfy the senses, so that the craving for food could disappear. So don't overeat, but don't eat too little as well. This path of moderation he called the middle way, a famous concept of Buddhism. It is the middle way between greed and pleasure, kama, and pain and suffering, mara. After this realization, Gautama approached the Bodhi Tree, the tree of awakening. He first positioned himself on the southern side of the tree. Instantly, the southern half of the world sank and it touched the lowest hell, while the northern side rose up to the highest heaven. This cannot be the place for attainment of supreme wisdom, the Buddha thought, because he destabilized the entire world. After trying two other sides with the same results, he came to the east side. He sat down there, and the earth did not move. He had found the center of the universe. This is a powerful concept, possibly not to be taken literally, but to be taken psychologically, to be understood as a metaphor for a psychological state of perfect balance and control. and that was the place he found at the east side of the Bodhi Tree. The symbolism of the earth shifting upward and downward and him finding that balance point also suggests that what the Buddha was doing was not just like a practice for relaxation or so, how we interpret it like meditation in the Western world, but it was of cosmic significance. The Buddha had discovered a truth to end suffering once and for all. He said, "This place underneath the Bodhi tree is the immovable spot on which all the Buddhas have established themselves. This is the place for destroying passion's net. Let my skin, sinews and bones become dry and welcome, and let all the flesh and blood of my body dry up, but never from this seat will I stir until I have attained the supreme and absolute wisdom." Such perseverance and tenacity. Brilliant. And this is the Bodhi tree. The Buddha is supposed to be sitting underneath, but in the first centuries after his passing, he wasn't depicted for religious reasons. Then, while sitting at the immovable spot, a demon appeared in front of him, first as Lord Desire or Kama, bearing a flowery bow, and then as Lord Death, Mara, the king of demons. Buddha's encounter with the demon has become one of the most insightful symbols in all of Buddhism, so we will take some time reading out his encounter. First, the demon appears as desire, as Kama. We read, "The one who is called in the world, the Lord Desire, the owner of the flowery shafts, the final foe of spiritual disengagement, summoning before him the three attractive sons, mental confusion, gaiety, and pride, and his voluptuous daughters, lust, delight, and pining. They were sent before the Blessed One, before the Buddha." So in this form, Kama tries to seduce him. We then read, "Taking up his flowery bow and his 5 infatuating arrows, he went to the foot of the tree where the great being Gautama was sitting. Toying with an arrow, the god showed himself and addressed the calm seer, who was there making the ferry passage to the farther shore of the ocean of being." A metaphor for becoming the Buddha, crossing an ocean on a ferry. "Up, up, O noble prince," the demon spoke, with a voice of divine authority. "Recall the duties of your caste and abandon this dissolute quest for disengagement." Now he's trying to convince him, saying he has duties in his life. He cannot just abandon them and sit under a tree doing nothing. The mendicant life, the life of the hermit, is ill-suited for anyone born in a noble house. You have to respect that you're of nobility. You cannot become a hermit. You need to be devoted to the duties of your caste. You are to serve the order of the good of society, maintain the laws of the revealed religion, combat wickedness in the world, and merit thereby a residence in the highest heavens as a god. But the Blessed One failed to move. All these temptations had no effect. "Will you not rise?" said the god. He fixed an arrow to his bow. "If you are stubborn, stiff-necked, and abide by your resolve, this arrow that I am notching to my string, which has already inflamed the sun itself, shall be let fly. It is already darting out its tongue at you like a serpent, threatening without result." He released the shaft, yet it made no impact. He does not even notice the arrow that has set the sun aflame. Can he be destitute of sense? He is worthy neither of my flowery shaft, nor of my daughters. Let me send against him my army. And this is where Lord Desire turns into Lord Death, Mara. And this is the most powerful part of his encounter with the demon. And immediately putting off his infatuating aspects as the Lord Desire, the great god became the Lord Death, and around him an army of demonic forms crystallized, wearing frightening shapes and bearing in their hands bows and arrows, darts, clubs, swords, trees, and even blazing mountains. So these demons were even lifting up whole mountains to scare the Buddha. Painting all these hundreds of demons is very common in Buddhist art, and we'll see some of these artworks in a moment. But because of the importance, we'll go through that horrifying, hellish vision that the Buddha had to face. These demons had faces of boars, fish, horses, carnets, asses, tigers, bears, lions, and elephants. Some were one-eyed, some multi-faced, some three-headed, some pot-bellied and with speckled bellies. They were equipped with claws, equipped with tusks, some bearing headless bodies in their hands. Many with half-mutilated faces, monstrous mouths, knobby knees, and the reek of goats. We continue. With fiery or smoke-colored hair, with many long, pendulous ears, having half of their faces white, the other half of their body green, red and smoke-colored, yellow and black, with arms longer than the reach of serpents, their girdles jiggling with bells, some as tall as palms, bearing spears, some of a child's size with projecting teeth. Some sported in the sky, others went along the top of the trees, many danced upon each other, more leaped about wildly on the ground. One dancing shook a trident around, crashed his club, another blazed out flames from every hair. And then there were some who stood around to frighten him with many lolling tongues, many mouths, savage, sharply pointed teeth, upright ears like spikes, and eyes like the disk of the sun, imagine. Others leaping into the sky, flung rocks and trees and axes, blazing the straw, as voluminous as mountain peaks, showers of embers, serpents of fire, and showers of stone, so they throwed all kinds of projectiles towards him. And all the time a naked woman, bearing in her hand a skull, flittered about, unsettled, staying not in any spot like the mind of a distracted student over sacred texts. And here we see a famous painting of this occurrence. The Buddha was sitting calm in concentration, in meditation, while all the demons, this whole army of horrifying figures, appears around him. Then the demon roused against him the fury of the winds. Fierce gales rushed towards him from the horizon, uprooting trees, devastating entire villages, shaking mountains. But the hero never moved. Not a single fold of his robe was disturbed. The evil one, the demon, made blazing rocks and hurled them at the hero. They spat through the air, but changed when they came near the tree and fell not as rocks, but as flowers. So the projectiles turned into flowers. Mara then commanded his army to shoot their arrows at his enemy, but the arrows also turned into flowers. And we see this depicted in this Mongolian painting. If you look closely, if you zoom in a little bit, you see that at the end of the spears and the arrows, flowers appear. And then a voice from the gods cried from the sky, "O Mara, king of demons, take not upon thyself this vain fatigue. Put aside your malice and go from the Buddha in peace. For though fire may one day give up its heat, water its fluidity, earth its solidity, never will this great being, the Buddha, who acquired the merit that brought him to this tree through many lifetimes in unnumbered eons, abandon his resolve. Never would the Buddha give up." Gautama had overcome the temptations of lust, social duty, and finally the fear of death. Of course, his encounter with the demon can also be read psychologically. Some people believe there were actually demons around him. Other people believe he was confronting his own shadow, his own fears, his own desires, his own jittering thoughts, and so on. But while he had succeeded at that moment, he achieved enlightenment or nirvana, and he became officially the Buddha or a Buddha. Anyone attaining an enlightenment at this stage becomes a Buddha. And Buddha just means an awakened one. And now we come to the end of the story. In the last few decades of his life, the Buddha taught what he had learned during this phase. And around his 80th birthday, the Buddha laid down on his side and gently passed on into what is called parinirvana, or complete extinction. And the fire of his ego finally flickered out completely. He had completely disengaged from suffering. He had defeated birth, old age, disease, and death. And he escaped from the endless cycle of suffering and reincarnation. And then here's some last images. We see here the Buddha teaching his first sermon in the deer park. You see some deer in front, a very famous symbol in Buddhism as well. And here we see him laying at his side, about to pass away into parinirvana. Okay, so here we have it, people. The life of the Buddha. I hope you have been inspired by this. If you want to know more about Buddhism or any of the other great religions or philosophical traditions and so on in world history, go and get this book. You can only order it now through worldhistorybook.com. See you next time. Bye bye.